Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this new format of ours, Disrupting with DePIN, where we seek to deep dive into specific sectors, DePIN sectors, on a regular basis and try to understand what they're all about. Today, we're going to deep dive into the renewable energy sector, and we have Dr. Jemma Green from Powerledger with us today. Hi, Jemma. Thanks so much for joining.
Hi, Sebastian. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Before we go into any details, quick recap for everybody that is not aware yet. What is the DePIN Association? So the DePIN Association is all about promoting DePIN, right? So it's about fostering innovation, setting industry standards. Initiatives include such as this one, right? This podcast format include standardization for interoperability and security, supporting R&D, and of course engaging the community and stakeholders through education and events, right? Members, just so you are aware, include Accurist, IoTex, Peak, GeoDNet, DePIN Hub, SafeJunction, Pocket, U2U Network, Silencio, Nauros, and then of course Powerledger and the Possible Cloud Network ICN. Without further ado, I would say let's get right into it, Jemma. Before we talk about Powerledger, I would first like to understand you better as a person, get to know you. So you've done a PhD topic on solar and battery systems. Can you tell us what that was all about?
Yes, it was really focused on commercial models and business models for electricity markets, recognizing that pretty much 30 years ago, electricity started to change from a centralized system, which was one direction, big power stations bringing electricity to people's homes and businesses, to being more of a two-sided market, bi-directional, stimulated by rooftop solar and feed-in tariffs. And this began to change the actual physical flows of energy in the grid, but also this feed-in tariff was a new commercial model that was really changing the shape of energy. And there were some places where this was more pronounced, some high-income OECD countries like Germany, Australia, Denmark. And it wasn't just rooftop solar, it was large-scale solar and also wind as well. And broadly speaking, these are what we would call variable renewable energy, in contrast to more traditional sources of energy, which are dispatchable. So that's gas, coal-fired power, nuclear power, which can be turned on and off at will. Whereas variable renewable energy is more dependent on when the sun's shining in the case of solar, or when the wind is blowing in the case of wind power. And so there was another dimension to that as well, which is this sort of uncertainty around the weather. And all of this had led to having to actually change the actual poles and wires, the transportation system, the network, to move that electricity around, but also keep it stable. So if suddenly, in a suburb, there's a lot of solar that's being exported but not consumed, it's making its way up the physical, the road for the electricity to a substation and causing congestion, or it's causing issues with frequency control or ancillary services. And so all of a sudden, the engineers, which would just basically upgrade a substation to deal with this in the traditional kind of sense of electricity, if they actually adopted that approach everywhere, it was going to make electricity very expensive, and it already was. And you can see a super high positive correlation between penetration of variable renewable energy and high electricity costs. So the most pronounced, actually, until recently, was Germany, but UK just took this the helm as the most expensive electricity in the world. It was previously Germany. Australia's up there as well, Denmark, and this is because the commercial models and the business models for managing the grid weren't really taking account of this. And what I mean by that is, it was the feed-in tariff said build energy wherever, whenever. And actually what was needed was to encourage the location of generation assets, variable generation assets, nearer to consumers and not exceeding the amount of energy that was actually needed at a typical point in day when, for example, with the solar panels. And to do that, you needed new market models and business models to actually make that work. So this two-sided market is a new relationship with consumers where they are actually market participants, a kind of democratization of power. And my PhD was really looking at this new paradigm around the emergence of local energy markets, two-sided markets, and citizen utilities. And so I looked at the kind of transition that we're going through, and I don't really like using that word. It's a bit of a misnomer in terms of like the concept of an energy transition, because often it's spoken about in terms of, oh, we're just going to replace like coal and gas with solar and wind, which is not actually happening. It's more of an energy expansion. But in the case of a transition, I mean a transition from a centralized system to a hybrid system, which is both centralized and distributed. And my PhD was looking at what are the market models and the commercial models needed to actually grow renewables without these perverse outcomes, like to grow it in a way that was really efficient and making sure that the grid was not overbuilt.
Very interesting. Can't wait to deep dive into this topic. I mean, I can totally relate, especially in Germany, as you mentioned. It's a big topic, right? It has been for years now. I'm not sure that the Holy Grail was found yet, right? But maybe it's also about stepping stones. So really, really curious to deep dive here. Jemma, you have been quite early with this topic, I guess, because I mean, at least for a PhD thesis, you would have done a bachelor and master's around this topic as well. What brought you into this topic? Is there anything like growing up? Was this already a topic that was discussed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So my undergraduate degree was actually in finance, and I worked in banking for 11 years. But the first part of that time was spent in mainstream finance. I worked in risk, in derivatives, interest rate derivatives, and equity derivatives. But then I actually changed direction. We're still working within the bank, but looking at environmental and social risk management for the bank's lending and underwriting activities. I worked for 9 years at JP Morgan. And I did a master's in sustainability that was really looking at the work that I was doing within the bank. So, for example, mining, oil and gas companies, commodity companies wanting to list on stock exchanges. My job was really to look at their environmental standards, prepare the disclosures in the prospectuses for the clients, for the international investors, and make sure the companies knew the expectations of international investors in terms of environmental standards, health and safety standards, social standards. And so I kind of made this sort of augmentation from my mainstream finance into sustainability through my work at the time in banking. And then in 2012, I took a sabbatical and decided to have a little bit of a rethink about what I wanted to do. And as a part of that, I went hiking. I did the Camino de Santiago. I got this idea whilst hiking, which I found like quite meditative, to build an eco-village. It was a bit of a kind of random idea, I would describe it. And I actually didn't want to talk to anyone about it because I thought it was a little bit crazy. But eventually I shared it with a friend of mine who happened to have done a PhD. And she suggested that I reach out to a professor at a university in Perth. And at that point, I was contemplating moving back to Australia. So I reached out and kind of organically, spurred a conversation with him and also the mayor of Fremantle at the time, that it could be a doctoral research project and applied research to design a solar and battery system for the eco village. And so that's kind of how, that kind of came about. I'll come back to that in a second, because you're really asking also about my kind of upbringing and like what had me be interested in this. And I grew up on a farm, and I think that, I think nature and taking care of the environment was always something that was really kind of core to like my upbringing. Like I remember actually, like when I was in primary school, my dad organized for the school to come to our farm and we planted trees. And the reason I got into pivoted into environmental work when I was working at JP Morgan, originally when I was in the banking side, I wanted to get into, I had the idea that I wanted to work in sustainability, but I didn't have the skills and training. And I thought I did actually a leadership training course. And as a part of that, I had to do a project, and I looked around JP Morgan's London offices and realized there was no recycling. And so I decided to.
When was this?
this would have been like 2000 and probably 2006.
No recycling whatsoever.
So no.
Interesting how times changed.
Yeah, and so I figured out. I spoke to like the building services people. At that time, there was about 9,000 people working for JP Morgan in London. It was across 6 buildings. They've since moved to 1 building in Canary Wharf. But I quite audaciously, I would say, I was like an associate, level, not very senior. I reached out to the chief operating officer for Europe and asked him if I could speak to him for like 5 minutes. And I basically pitched this idea that if we introduced recycling into the offices, we could save like £500,000 a year. And he instantly said yes. And like 3 months later, we rolled out recycling bins, and I was super happy to see this until I saw people putting their recycling into their rubbish bin at their desk under their, and I was really upset. And so I figured out, if you actually got rid of 9,000 bins under the desk, and at the end of the aisle of desks, you had both a rubbish bin and a recycling bin, that was like 9,000 bin liners a day. You only needed 1,000. And, you could save another at least £500,000 and increase the rate of recycling. And so I went back to the chief operating officer and pitched this idea. And he said, okay, let's do it. And 3 months later, the system got rolled out, and I became the most hated person in the bank overnight. People started a Facebook page called Bring the Bins Back. I was blamed for rats in the office. People were like leaving their, rubbish on their desk rather than walking to the aisle desk and saying, I'm so busy making money for the bank, I don't have time to walk to the the recycling. And we said, we've put them on the way to the bathroom. So, and people would say things like, I'm so busy, working, I don't have time to go to the bathroom. And I mean, it's kind of like, it was, I was quite incredulous. And fortunately, the chief operating officer at the time said, look, they wouldn't be behaving like this at home. The system can stay. And so I was like, this is way more interesting than my day job. And actually, that was the thing that catalyzed it in the moment when I want to work in this field, because I thought this whole change management thing is like, how do you actually engage people in things that are actually good for us all, but require us to change our behavior? And at that point in time, JP Morgan was creating this environmental and social risk office, and there were some positions, and I applied, and they said, no, you can't. We want to hire people that are really experienced. Then they ended up hiring a very senior guy who had a lot of environmental experience, but no banking experience. And then they changed their kind of sentiment towards me because they thought I could help him understand the banking world and he could train me around sustainability. And that's what ended up happening. But I think for me, like within the environmental field, there's a lot of what I would call kind of extreme behavior, which I really don't ascribe to, like throwing, like vandalizing art, or things like we have to turn like just stop oil. I think these things are not correct, and I think like the climate, I would call it an orthodoxy, has gone too far. And part of the reason why we created Powerledger was looking at how do we have non-subsidized market mechanisms to actually grow renewables in a sensible way, because subsidy was actually causing the problem. And I don't think we're in an energy transition. We're not. We're in an energy expansion. So it's like, how do we integrate renewables along with all the existing energy sources without causing too much cost increase? And so I'd say that this is something that it's kind of like a hybrid for me. Like that's really important, like taking care of the environment. And I don't think it's like at the expense of actually people living their lives, and economic development. Like electricity is so important to bring people, lift people's economic standards economic output and standard of living. And there's still like 700 million people, I think, that live in poverty. So electricity is like a really, crucial foundational piece to actually achieve that. And so I think we need to really embrace more energy as opposed to less energy, although we can use it more efficiently and, not so wastefully.
100% subscribe to this. Also very hot topic in Germany, all of what you just mentioned. Maybe let's switch to Powerledger. So you were in this banking industry, you have the PhD in your pocket. What brought you onto Web3? Like, were you one of those 2012 early Bitcoin fanatics, or did you just stumble upon it along the way?
I know I wasn't that early, but I met my business partner, John Bullich, the fellow co-founder of Powerledger, in February of 2016. So it was quite a long time ago. We call ourselves dinosaurs. But there's certainly, obviously people that have been even earlier in the space. But and I think, the idea for Powerledger was very pioneering and still is like hugely pioneering. Like it really is really experimenting at the emerging end of energy. But what happened was I was halfway through my PhD and I had just had my first child, Amelie, and she was 7 weeks old. And a former banking colleague of mine wrote me an email and introduced me to John Bullich. And I actually was not inclined to kind of arrange to meet him, which was the request, because I just had a baby and I didn't really want to do any work. But I felt bad for some reason, and I called up my mum, who lived just around the corner from me, and said, could you come over and hold the baby while I talk to this guy? And so the four of us sat in my living room, mum holding the baby and me talking to John, and he had developed applications in blockchain, and he had a blockchain company that was developing different solutions, not in energy, in other areas, in like the medical field, improving data. They had developed a solution called UProve, which was like authenticating photos in terms of time and type and place where they'd been taken. And he was seeking me some introductions to my network. And I had really only heard about blockchain at that point, very notionally, like I'd heard of Bitcoin, like that's the level of detail. And so I was like, well, tell me. He was very enthusiastic about this technology and that it was going to do so many interesting things in the world. And I said, well, what about my PhD research project, which I was halfway through at that point. And I had designed this solar and battery system for the Eco Village. But I was trying to find software that would allow for the sharing and trading of electricity within the Eco Village. And I could not find any software that did that. And I said, could it do anything to this with this? And so this started us looking together, and we saw, one, it could do that. Two, it could actually do other things like trade energy across the grid, not just in a microgrid setting, which was an eco village, but also tokenize energy, tokenize carbon credits, tokenize attribute certificates attached to energy, like renewable energy certificates. So we saw a lot of opportunity. We got very excited, and 3 months later we set up the company. And that was, 8.5 years ago. And so that was really like what led to the, meeting John, and also, setting up Powerledger in the first place.
Fantastic story and fantastic use case, I think, especially in the early days. So for those that are just tuning in, Jemma, could you give a brief, one sentence overview of what is Powerledger?
Certainly. So Powerledger makes software for utilities so that they can invent new products for their customers that allow them to, get more granular and specific about energy in terms of type, time, place, like to choose their own energy mix, also to be able to trade energy with each other peer-to-peer. And we also have a marketplace called TraceX, which is for trading attribute certificates, so renewable energy certificates and carbon credits as well. And so that is for generators that have like a, solar farm owner that wants to sell like renewable energy certificates. They can put the certificates on our marketplace and sell them to a buyer, which is typically a company that wants to, have renewable energy in its portfolio. And one of the ways they can do that is to buy these certificates. And that platform, TraceX, is really innovative because normally to buy these certificates is actually a very manual process to either go through a broker or some platforms which are very manual. And so when you start talking about like large volumes that you're buying, there's like a very big cost in terms of the middle office and the back office processing of that. And it adds a lot of expense to that. Whereas our platform is a complete end-to-end seamless. So you can put the RECs on, you can sell them, they get transferred to the buyer, the money goes at the same time, so there's no counterparty risk as well, which is a huge thing when you're buying and selling things like this, like who sends the thing first and who pays, and what if they don't pay, whereas that risk is taken out. So it's a very efficient process, and it also allows for great price transparency as well, so the buyers can see how much the RECs are in the market, and also specify, I want RECs from, a particular, like from solar farms or wind farms or from this state or that state. And so they can actually start to get much more specific around the kind of RECs they want, which is becoming quite important for companies. They want to support like energy projects in the markets in which they operate, for example. So that's TraceX. And then the utility solution, just to give you an example, like we're working in Austria with a very large utility there called Energy Steiermark, and they are really pioneering and want to be very customer centric in the products. So we've developed a peer-to-peer product with them that they've rolled out now commercially to residential customers and commercial and industrial customers as well. And that could be like a business that wants to buy energy locally, or like a company that might have lots of sites, some of which have solar, some that don't, and then they can share that energy within their own real estate portfolio as well, using our platform. So yeah, I do ask me for a sentence, and I spoke a lot more than one, but that's in a nutshell what we do.
That's perfect. Just to be sure, when you mention RECs, this refers to renewable energy certificates, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's like kind of a generic term. They're called like guarantees of origin in Europe. They've got different names, but a renewable energy certificate is actually 1 megawatt hour of renewable power produced. And so when you say you're a company and you want to buy renewables, you could put solar on your roof. You could buy a power purchase agreement, which is an offtake agreement from someone else's solar farm, and they will sell you the energy and the certificate together, and it's called a bundled PPA. But you could also just buy energy from the grid, which is plain old energy, and then you can buy a certificate from someone else, and then you can combine that and claim that it's renewable. So that's basically what a renewable energy certificate is.
So just to understand the product a bit better, so you mentioned the original use case, which was the software for this village. Now you also mentioned the Steiermark collaboration. What do you think your average customer is? Is it like a B2C or B2B, or really a mix between the two?
Yeah, so I think that there's a great use case for microgrids, but they typically, like from an aggregation perspective, like for us to service a lot of small microgrids, it doesn't really make sense. And so, and to come back to the comment around like, us pioneering something, when we set up the company in 2016, we built the product for the Eco Village and some other projects in New Zealand and in Thailand and in Japan. And then in 2017, we wrote a white paper with our vision for energy. And we saw many companies doing like initial coin offerings or token generation events. And there were like dozens that were doing stuff in energy, and they literally just had a white paper and no projects. And we were like, well, we've got a platform and clients and whatnot. And I think we thought, we could perhaps do this. So we actually did Australia's first initial coin offering, and we created the Power token, which was an access token, to access the software. And since then, almost all those companies have disappeared. There's one or two left plus us. And I think that is, some of them pivoted and started doing other things after, doing their ICO. Others really chugged at it, but the segments that they focused on, I think, varied quite a lot, and the product and the markets. In our case, we were quite experimental, and we've done more than 30 projects in 15 countries or something like this. But I think in the past year, what we started to do was really analyze the projects that we had. For example, there could have just been one advocate within the company that was really interested in peer-to-peer trading or blockchain even, and they were able to do that project, but they didn't necessarily have a mandate within the company to do something bigger beyond that, or they had permission from the regulator to do something at a certain level of scale and perhaps bigger. But when we looked at all the projects in concert, we were like, well, where do we want to focus our energy and resources? And what we decided to do was just really hone in on the projects and the markets where we saw a larger addressable market and a larger nearer term obtainable market. And so we've actually consolidated our focus to be in 4 countries right now. And just over a year ago, we were in more than 10, just to put that into context. So we've really had a consolidation and focus in the strategy to go deeper. And to answer your question in specific around the product, I think the energy sharing is something that is particularly relevant for Europe because of the clean energy package. And for us, our kind of go-to-market strategy is with utilities. We want to support utilities that want to offer this product to their customers, or some of the utilities want to offer this product to energy communities that might want to set up themselves, as opposed to us going direct to energy communities and selling to every energy community. That's not really the route that we've chosen. So we're really B2B to allow tracking and trading of energy for retailers to offer that to their customers.
So let's put a pin in that. You mentioned something very interesting and personal question here, because I am from Europe. You know, the perception is that Europe is over-regulating pretty much everything.
Yes.
But you mentioned that could be beneficial for you guys because we are pushing so much the renewable sector. Is that, do you think, an advantage, or do you think it's overdoing it?
Yeah, it really depends. Like, even with the clean energy package and the kind of energy communities like aspect of that, all the member states have transposed that into their local legislation in different ways. So, for example, France has rules around the amount of kilometres that an energy community can exist in. It's different in Italy,
even nuclear, and they think that it's renewable.
Network. Yeah, from a software company that wants to service that market, it actually makes doing that very complicated. And so we've actually had to analyze, the member states' transposition to see where do you want to focus in Europe. It's not like one place, actually, even though it's like a directive that covers, all the member states. So I think it's very complicated, actually. So our priority has really been to find energy Steiermark equivalents in other member states where we see the regulation makes sense for us. But I think, Europe has, definitely created so much bureaucracy that, you can see capital is leaving, talent is leaving. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US, there were so many projects that got FID'd off the back of that. It was a very elegant, simply written piece of legislation. Whether you like it or not, it actually created capital pools over there, and there were none coming out of Europe. And it made Europe kind of get its skates on to think of a response to that. But you can see there's a big tangle around that, and I think it's going to be a problem unless that gets addressed.
Let's see. For the average Joe. So we talked about, we talked about regulation, we talked about B2B. So why should the average Joe care? I mean, if I look at my household bill, probably I care about pricing. If I am brought up in a certain way, if I'm curious about, the environmental renewables, then I might be able to add a little bit on top. But that's more of an intrinsic desire. So why should the average Joe care about the energy sector in a larger sense?
Well, it depends on the extent to which they're allowed to participate. So, if they get a feed-in tariff, all they think about is how much am I going to get for the electricity that I export, that I don't consume, and how fast will they pay back my investment in the solar system, for example. And that's the extent to which they care. So the market mechanism, the commercial model, dictates the extent to which they care. Whereas actually there's a lot more action, commercial action, to be gotten. For example, if you allow consumers to offer congestion services or frequency control ancillary services from their battery via a virtual power plant would probably be more frequency control ancillary services, but congestion is actually a local service, then they might actually generate enough income to say, for example, instead of paying off your battery in 11 years, pay it off in 6 years. Or instead of putting in a small battery just for myself, I'm going to put in a bigger battery and actually make money and pay it off faster. Or instead of putting in a 3 kilowatt solar system on my roof just to optimize self-supply, if I can actually sell that to my neighbors who've got it in a battery and are going to dispatch that in the peak, I could get a pretty good price for that. And I might want to put in an 8 kilowatt system on my roof, and my roof can do that. So the market mechanism starts people thinking about how big a system do I want, because of the payback period on that, and also what that ultimately does to their electricity bills. And we know electricity bills have gone up dramatically. So there's a strong, and that's a big percentage of people's monthly expenditure. We know because of the inflation in electricity that people are having to make very difficult choices between heating and eating. It's very serious, and the costs that are in the system can effectively be made more efficient through the participation of citizens, and through systems that can actually drive efficiencies with their own electricity bills, and also pay back investment in infrastructure that they might put on site faster. And that could also be used, for example, to charge their EV, which would make things more cost effective rather than or a hybrid car that might actually use petrol or diesel plus electric. They can be using electric more often and at a lower cost. So I think there's a whole range of opportunities that would engage consumers and do engage consumers depending on what's the commercial model that's afforded to them.
And I think we briefly touched upon it, but maybe you can erase that or highlight it again. Where does the token come in all of this? How does that help you enable this system and drive this forward?
Yeah, so when we started using the Power token, we used it as an access token for customers to pay, like B2B customers to pay their license fee to access the software. And they could either pay that in cash or pay in Power. And if they paid in cash, we kept it. Whereas if they pay in Power, at the end of the contract, they can actually get the Power back. So they're relatively incentivized to pay in Power over paying in cash. So we tested that model for quite some time to see what the acceptance and appetite was. And I think it was quite varied because basically you've got financial controllers that have to figure out how to address this on their balance sheet, and they may not have ever touched crypto before. Notwithstanding that, there was still quite a few that did this, but we kind of were looking at what other models could be useful or interesting around this. And around about that time, we decided to move from an Ethereum-based blockchain, which was like a private consortium chain, which had real limitations in terms of scale. I don't know if you know how much you know about Ethereum can only process 15 transactions per second. And when you get a lot of metadata, then it's not able to process that. And it's also very expensive on Ethereum. You're nodding in
Yes. Sorry, I'll give the audio listeners a cue. Yes, I am very aware, and we are facing a similar problem. So that's why Ethereum, at least as a layer 1, is usually not the preferred choice, right?
Yeah, and then there's a lot of layer 2 projects now, and their kind of pitch is, layer 2 is like another blockchain connected to Ethereum that processes things so it can happen faster. But when you connect 2 blockchains together, you might solve that problem, but then you create other problems. For example, the blockchains have got to talk to each other, and then there might be some congestion between the blockchains. And then how do you know when the transaction's final? And what's the ingredients for that? There's costs associated with having a layer 2 in addition to the layer 1, and that's not trivial. And then as more broadly, more and more things go in layer 2s, then a lot of the value gets accrued within the layer 2s. And the idea was that there'll be so many layer 2s that there'll be ultimately benefit to the layer 1 Ethereum. But that is a theory. It may not be the case. It might be that actually the value in Ethereum gets eroded and the network is no longer as stable. And so we looked at all that and went, we don't like that. It doesn't actually make sense to us. It solves one problem and creates a whole host of others. And so then we spent about a year looking for another protocol, layer 1, that would be fit for purpose for energy and sustainability. And we discovered Solana. And this was around 2020, 2021. And we decided to fork Solana and run it as a private consortium chain. And what we did that for about a year, and then we made the chain public as well. And we used Power tokens to secure the blockchain. So nodes were maintaining a piece of the blockchain, staking some Power tokens, and being paid Power tokens in reward. And that was the model. that we've been using until like about 2 weeks ago. And we announced at a Solana breakpoint that we were expanding into Solana mainnet. And we did that because it was kind of a natural step, because we'd been experimenting with the Solana technology, and it was really like fit for purpose and great. But if you maintain like a fork of the chain, you have to build all your own tools, and there's like a lot of work you have to do in maintaining that like core blockchain technology, really at the expense of developing product. So we just thought it would make more sense to move to mainnet, and then we've got access to all the tools, and then also the ecosystem. Like the DePIN work within Solana is obviously thriving and growing, like because of the amazing work of the DePIN Association, as well as the other, the refi ecosystem around renewable energy and sustainability, as well as the ecosystem at large. So we just announced at Solana Breakpoint in Singapore this year that we were expanding onto mainnet, and we completed the migration on the 13th of October this year. And what was the migration? So we moved our products into mainnet, and we've also locked up a portion of Power tokens in Ethereum. So Power will still remain an ERC20 token in Ethereum, but we've locked up a portion of those, and we've minted an equivalent proportion of Power on Solana as well. And so we are evolving the kind of use case for Power around that, and there's quite a lot of different use cases that we are in the process of like doing R&D around, in addition for our own products, but also for Web3 solutions as well. So just to give you an idea, just as an example, projects within Web3 that might like buy products and services. So for example, they might buy flights and they want to offset. They can buy carbon credits from us that we've tokenized, and they will get Power tokens as a reward as well. Or they could pay for products and services within Within3 using Power tokens, and also get Power tokens as a reward. So there's a different, so I guess what I'm saying here is Power as a payment token, and also for rewards. So there's within the Solana ecosystem, I think there's still a lot for us to really kind of figure out. I wouldn't say figure out, really just hone in on what we're going to focus on first. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for using the Power token within the Solana ecosystem, as well as it remaining a Ethereum ERC20 token.
So 2 follow-up questions on this. So first of all, when you did the migration to Solana, what was the reception of the community, or was there any reception, or was it just kind of nodded off?
Oh no, it was really great. Like it was very enthusiastic at Breakpoint. We got a lot of positive feedback there. We got a lot of media coverage on that, and then the community as well. We're very happy. They're kind of really hungry to know more. So we're just in the process of like preparing more updates for the community as well. So I'd say that it was resoundingly positive, and there's quite a lot of excitement and enthusiasm.
Amazing, congrats. And second follow-up question is, so we've touched upon the Web3 aspect now a lot. If we move back to the Web2, how is that kind of the intersection work? So reason where I'm coming from is, for us, we are, as a cloud company, on a go-to-market focus, we kind of put that Web3 aspect in brackets. It's mentioned, but it's more of a complexity rather than it makes things easier, right? How is that for you in the energy markets, both on the B2B and B2C side? Does it make it easier, or is it more complex?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The short answer is it depends, and the longer answer is that some clients are more enthusiastic about blockchain, and some find it more of a complexity. And so we make it more of a background or foreground conversation depending on that sentiment. So, if it's something that's seen as more of a complexity, we, rightly explain it like, it's like kind of like going to a supermarket. You don't go to a supermarket because it's got barcodes. Like no one says like, I'm going to Migros supermarket or Tesco's because of the barcodes. It doesn't happen. But the fact that they've got barcodes there means that the stock control is better. It also means that when you go through the till, it's faster. and there's less mistakes. And so it's just something that is like used in the background to count things and record things and improve trust in the system. So that's kind of like the kind of blockchain light. And then if they're more interested, then we can talk, more about the potential and how it can be used as a marketing tool and engagement, and that you can have tokens, room for rewards and incentives and all sorts of, other kind of Web3-esque things. And then I'd say that there's, within utilities, it is a slow moving space. It's not a fast moving sector at all. And I think that's understandable because, it's for 100 years, it's done things in a particular way. At the beginning of this conversation, we started talking about this centralized energy system that has remained unchanged for a century. And now it's starting to change. So it's a lot to ask, the organizations to change quickly. So, for us, it's really about finding the ones that are, up for it and like focusing our efforts there first to, demonstrate the product and its scale within those situations. But in terms of like consumers, I'd say that they've got more appetite than exists for product right now. So I think there's a gap. And the other thing that I would say around this is that, we are really straddling Web 2 and Web 3 in the same way you are. So we're making Web 3 solutions for the Web 2 market. And so we're trying to incorporate more Web 3 in as time goes on, as there's understanding, awareness and appetite, and really grow that Web 3 piece. And the other exciting thing about being in Solana, I think, is that there is quite a lot of Web 3 things that can happen now that are like more pure play Web 3. And so then we can be both kind of, Web 3 more, kind of true, as well as this Web 2 bringing into Web 3 piece as well.
I love the supermarket analogy. I think I'm going to start using it. It's amazing. So looking ahead, Jemma, what are some of the emerging opportunities in the renewable energy sector, both on the Web 2 or in the Web 3 side?
Yeah, I think there's a big thing around AI. So, AI, blockchain gets sort of maligned as using so much energy, but like AI is already using like 3 times more energy than blockchain. And, Bitcoin obviously is the bigger energy hungry layer 1, but many of the others, proof of stake, are not energy intensive. Notwithstanding that, there's kind of sentiment around blockchain that it's like energy hungry, rightly or wrongly, and wrongly is the kind of considered view. Whereas with AI, yeah, you can find stuff that's talking about it like online, like articles and whatnot, but I don't think it's really part of the discourse. It's really just like, how can we make it more, bigger, faster, right? That's kind of the overarching sentiment or zeitgeist around it. And I think the big looming issue is actually how much energy that is going to take, how much it's taking already. And, my Google search versus my ChatGPT search, how much energy am I consuming? And it's orders of magnitude more. And if people understood that, they may start to want to make their AI green. And what does that look like? Well, that looks like data centers that have powering through like carbon-free sources of energy. And you will see actually quite a lot of the data centers and cloud solution providers like Google announcing now they're installing small-scale nuclear reactors at the data centers to provide carbon-free energy. And I think that apart from that, there will be a demand for knowing that my AI queries, my AI services are green from like a fairly large audience. So I think that how do you do that? Well, if you're actually just getting energy from the grid, then you've got to track how much renewable energy is in that grid, how many RECs do I need to buy, or how many carbon credits do I need to buy to offset that? And that is going to, the data centers in the world are actually located in a few countries. So it's actually going to, at least, based on current, is going to be concentrated in some particular areas. So the energy intensity of certain geographies that have a lot of data centers is going to be very high, but that is going to push up the price of electricity. So I think you're going to start to see more data centers be built elsewhere, purely for the reason of cost, but also for sovereignty as well. Like with legislation, for example, like the Patriot Act in the US, there are many countries that, under that act, their data, even if it's, stored in situ from an American data center provider, can be accessed through the US government, and that's seen as like unacceptable. So I think that there are other drivers in addition to cost, which are going to see more data centers be set up, and more the sentiment more around them is like, how much sovereignty do I have? How much does it cost? And also, how can I validate or make it green if I want to? If that's important to the consumer as well. So I think that's going to be a theme that emerges. I think the cost, the sentiment around the kind of energy trilemma, was around cost, sustainability, and stability. And I think it was very sustainability focused. But to the extent of stability, and now I'd say it's very stability focused. So everything's around energy security and energy stability and continuity of supply. So I think that's a very big theme, because, we've seen in places that don't have enough energy, what happens, South Africa being the classic case in point. And then the other theme around this is around, like what I said before, around this sort of climate orthodoxy, which is, very, there's some dark aspects of that, which are like, the idea that, there's too many people on the planet, and if we just had less people, then we'd be able to meet our climate goals. And so there's a lot of push around sort of that segment, which I think is quite dystopian. But there are also many within the environmental field that think that actually we're going to max out population, and actually population replacement is a big problem, because if you don't actually replace your population, then you're going to have economic disaster, because you're not actually generating enough income to actually support the aging population. And I think that is actually the real pressing issue right now. And so I think there are a lot of conversations which are like more political in nature around the climate conversation around this topic, which are going to become important. But stability, I think, and sovereignty around energy is going to becoming an area of increasing importance. And COVID, I think, was a real catalyst for conversations around like supply chain in that regard.
Very interesting. Stability, sustainability, and of course pricing. Very interesting dilemma or trilemma. Jemma, summing up, is there one or two key points that you want users to take away here? Maybe a misconception that you also want to clear up?
Yeah, I think that, if consumers want more from their retailer, I think it's important that they communicate that, because utilities develop new products when they think that the customer won't want it, or they hear from the customer that they might want it, and if they hear that others are providing it and they might lose customers, or others are providing it and they might not win as many customers. That's really how it works. So if these things are really important to you and your utility is not providing them, I would encourage you to tell them about that, and then also look for other ways that you can get your needs met. Like if you want to have more control over your energy future, or you're considering putting in a solar system or a battery or an EV, really think about these aspects before making a decision, because once you put a system in, it's like 20 years, you're unlikely to change that decision. So use that as a real opportunity to get something that's fit for purpose. You might be surprised about what your utility is contemplating and that you could be a part of as well. So I'd say that at the consumer level. And then for those that want to offset, I think within the Web3 space, I think stay tuned to what we're doing within Powerledger, within the DePIN Association, to hear more about how you can participate in purchasing carbon credits, or trading those assets, investing in them as well. And you can follow us on Twitter or X, Telegram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and our website.
Please do, and listen in again for our future formats. So again, we're going to deep dive into several really interesting DePIN industries, and as you saw here, we're trying to go a bit deeper than the usual X space you might be listening to in this Disrupting with DePIN format. Thanks so much, Jemma, for joining. Really fantastic talking to you. Great insights. And yeah, looking forward to bringing more and more energy market users into Web3 with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for having me.